A very warm welcome to USPIRE's webinar on Inspiring Insights. I'm Chester Robinson and I'm the Director of Consultancy, and I'll be hosting you over the next 25 minutes so that we can give you 5 minutes to get away and onto your next meeting. Our aim and purpose for today is to energize you, the listener, with some new ideas and perspectives on how to present insight in a compelling way, a way that seeks to stimulate transformation in the organizations and businesses that you work in. So just to say who we are, USPIRE is a group of passionate individuals who love to energize people to transform business. And we call our method champion-led change. I know that we've got a number of champions from our programs around the world today listening, so it's an especially warm welcome to them. Our champions will know well that inspiring is one of the key competencies required to energize transformation. For those of you less au fait with our concept of champion-led change, we define the competence of inspiring as the ability to embed new behavior changes in people by demonstrating what good looks like. There are 6 key capabilities to be a great inspirer, and the ability to scope the change needed is the first, followed by the capability of aligning with leaders, getting the stakeholders to buy in. Knowing how to then initiate that change and monitor progress as you go are fundamentally then underpinned by the ability to embed positive behaviours through coaching support. Now, I'm sure the panel will come on to highlight these skills needed to bring these capabilities to life. So I'd love to introduce our 3 panelists, who I'd like to succinctly introduce yourselves, please. Paul, in just 2 or 3 sentences, could you just introduce yourself, the B2B International, and perhaps what you're going to cover also?
Thank you, Chester. Well, my name's Paul Hague. A warm welcome to everybody. I am a career market researcher. It's all I've ever done in my life. I ask people questions. We end up producing reports, sometimes 100 pages of the damn things. And of course, we have to bring those alive. We have to make those energizing and hopefully transforming to people. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to use dreaded PowerPoint, but or perhaps how not to use it, and certainly how to get data alive and transforming organizations. So that's me, a market researcher.
Great, thanks, Paul. Great to have you with us. Now, Jill is in transit and I believe in a beautiful cafe somewhere. Jill, please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Jill Livesey and I work for a company called HIM. We are a research company and consultancy, and we specialise in explaining how people shop and explain their behaviour. And that's really, really important for what I'm going to share with you today. We also do a lot of research with retailers because they're shoppers as well, and how they source their products. What I'm going to share with you today is how you tackle information and data on a very tricky subject such as diversity, which needs careful handling. And I'm going to give you an example of how I presented that to a very wide audience. So essentially, how you talk about the issues of diversity to a room full of men and women.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Jill. We'll let you get back to your latte while we introduce David Boon. David, the Distillation Director at Fraction. I hope you don't mind that title.
Thanks, Chester. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so I run a small consultancy called Fraction. We're an unconventional team of really experienced business growth experts. Our job is to help organizations turn their information and data tangles into profitable data-inspired business growth. We do that by understanding some of the technical competencies around manipulating data, making it more useful for people, really understanding the application. So how is this going to be used to inform strategy? Who do we need to influence to get the change in behavior we're after? And obviously there's a really key organizational aspect to it, which is what's people's appetite and what's the curiosity in this business to understand what's going on and what's driving some of the things we're seeing.
Well, that's fascinating. You talk about behavior there. We'll come back on and talk a little bit about behavior change in due course, I'm sure. So thank you, David. Thank you, Jill. Paul, from your point of view, could you tell me how does insight inspire transformation to occur?
Well, I think that whenever you're presenting data, there's going to be, I hope, a sort of an aha moment. I get it, you know, I understand what you're saying that comes out of the data. The trouble with data is it can be so boring, and I think the skill is to build that data into a story, to take it somewhere that people can understand. And if you could just forward to a slide I want to share with you, I perhaps can give you an example. It's the slide on the right-hand side there, which is a snakes and ladders board. And we were working for one of the large house building companies, where they asked us to look at what the problems were and what people thought of house building when you know, buying one of their new houses. And the researcher that carried out the work wanted a framework, a model in which to build this dry data. And they came up with a snakes and ladders board. And I felt that this was inspiring. This helped transform the data. And what they were saying here is that it's a bit risky when you buy a new house. It's a huge investment. And one of the things, when you throw a dice, as you tend to do, have I made the right decision here? There is a salesperson involved. And if you get a good salesperson, it's going to certainly help transform the whole experience, which is why they're down at the bottom there next to the dice. And then, of course, there may be two individuals who are buying the house. There may be two partners who are joining together, one wanting an old house and one wanting a new house. And when you're buying a house, it is a bit like a snakes and ladders board. You might, for example, have a good deal with your mortgage and finance company, and that will move you up a ladder. But equally, there could be some snakes waiting for you, because, you know, there might be somebody in the chain that drops out and you drop down again, and oh, damn it, you know, you've lost where you are. And so what I'm saying here is that if you can think of a framework, a model, and it might not be a SWOT model or an ADA model or something like that, the ones that we're all familiar with, but if you can create a framework, it becomes very memorable, and it energizes the transformation. So my encouragement is to take data, but create a story and put it into a framework if you can. And then, just to make another point, the slide at the left-hand side is showing you something that you'll all be familiar with, that we get lots of data and hopefully lots of things that we can do with that data. And at the end of that, we have to prioritize it. And the prioritization tool that I like and I share with you there has very simple axes on it. On the left-hand side, the y-axis says, what's the impact going to be? Is it going to be a high impact or a low impact, this thing that we're going to do? And how easy is it going to be to implement this thing that we're going to do? Is it going to be easy or difficult? And if it is easy and going to have a high impact, then it's a no-brainer. We just get on with it. But on the other hand, if it's difficult to do and it has low impact, then really we'd say, why bother? We wouldn't do it. So think about what you have got out of all this data and think about it in that paradigm, in that model that I've got there. Frameworks and models, I think, are really important in energizing and helping us transform our data.
Great to hear there, Paul. In terms of, you know, the storytelling, for me, we believe that storytelling is something that we're innately wired into.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to remember the story and the picture. I love your visual of the snakes and ladders. I've never really thought about buying my house in that way. Jill, if I might bring you in at this point, what would you say the key ingredients are that make insight come to life in an inspiring way? I'm conscious you've talked about maybe a tricky subject.
No, we were commissioned by the Association of Women in Wholesale to conduct some research on the end goal was to promote wholesale sector as an attractive one to work for women, because it's hugely underrepresented. So the research we did with manufacturers and wholesalers on this very issue, the results were damning, and lots of data to go into the report, and we had to present the headlines of that to a senior audience, and therefore, how do you land that successfully? As I said, dealing with diversity has to be handled carefully. So really, the information I've shared with you, it doesn't matter what the data and the percentages are, but the importance was I can't show people lots and lots of bar charts. The audience will be lost within a minute. So instead, told a story, used something visual, because who doesn't like Lego? And so it was using the role of colour and explaining we have a problem and this needs to be addressed. So the role of Lego helped deliver a tough message in a nice, comfortable way, which was a good tool to use. However, using toys, Lego, information, it also had to be dealt seriously. And so when you got to the killer slide of what is the main challenge that you need to leave with people to take out from supply and wholesalers, there are no pictures, there are no Lego in this. It has to be simply put as a bar chart. And so I'm pleased to say it landed successfully, and the result of it has been phenomenal, and it led to a huge investment of training across the sector. So I think that the story is, when you have a wide audience that don't like reading bar charts because they're not insight people, try and make it visual, colourful, but make sure you're delivering a serious message at the same time.
I'm loving the Batman. Is that a Batwoman with the yellow cape on there?
I'm afraid so. Yes. I mean, Lego needs to probably have a look at their own diversity, because women are representative with long hair or dresses. So that's a discussion for another day.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Jill. David,
okay.
Moving beyond Lego and moving into your realms, what do you believe are some of the other factors that we might need to think about when we're trying to bring insight to life, through this storytelling? Is there a secret formula?
So I think there isn't a secret formula, but there are a few things that we all encounter when we're trying to take information and ultimately get someone to do something different on the back of that. And that can be, working within a corporation, trying to unlock capital investment for new lines, or marketing investment to activate a new program. But equally, it often crosses company boundaries. So suppliers working with retailers, seeking to influence the retailer's agenda, and the ability to land insight then across something that's going to land with a different audience is often challenging. So I tend to use this kind of very simple 2x2 axis, and insight ultimately is something that people didn't know before, or didn't understand in the way that it's being conveyed today. So it's kind of, I think, Chester, you've used the language, a hidden truth, but it also has to be really relevant, really important to what that individual is seeking to do within their role. So you have the unimportant to important axis, and the challenge is that that's not universal. What's important to one person is not important to another. So there is this risk that if we spend time on stuff that is not important, we're going to either bore people or give them trivia, but we're not going to give them true insight. And that's quite tricky, I think. If you are, for example, a supplier talking with a retailer, what's really, really important for them, and what do they know today about the way their business is performing, or the way a category is performing, and what's currently unknown. And so it's in the top right that this is where we want to be spending our time. But in order to know what goes in that box, it's really key that we deeply understand our audience, whether they're an internal audience or an external audience. The other thing is that sometimes information can be not new, but it's the way that it's conveyed, it becomes mind or heart opening. And I think, the examples with Lego and the snakes and ladders are good ways to try and get beyond, oh yeah, we know all this, which could be a reaction. And that sort of reaction doesn't inspire change. It doesn't get people to do different things. So I quite like what government were doing in road safety campaigning. What's interesting here is that we are all fully aware that if you're driving faster, it takes longer, or you travel more distance before you stop. Okay, so this idea of stopping distance is drummed into us from the days of driving lessons. But frankly, it doesn't motivate a change in behavior, other than this broad awareness that, yes, it's going to take me longer to stop. It's not visceral, really. And so some of the latest information, and this is now being used in some of those speed awareness trainings and what have you, is to translate exactly the same information that is common publicly available into something that's more mind-opening. So the example on the right here, if I'm traveling at 20 miles an hour, I'll stop in 3 car lengths, let's say. If I'm traveling at 25 miles an hour, the question is not where will I stop, which is kind of it almost feels irrelevant, but what speed would I still be doing at the moment where I would have stopped if I was doing 20 miles an hour instead of 25. And that is a surprising finding. So it's just a rearticulation of the same data, but I think that, there we go, most people wouldn't imagine that you'd still be doing 18 miles an hour if you were start at 25, but you'd be stopped if you were starting at 20. So it's just interesting the way, if we really understand our audience, we understand what we're trying to get them to do differently, and we know something about the barriers and where some of the shutters will come down. Maybe we can come up with new mind-opening ways to convey even some of the pre-existing data in a new way to get people to change the way they think about their business.
Thanks very much, David. I mean, influencing the agenda, understanding the audience, and then building on kind of Paul and Jill's points around storytelling and putting things in a compelling way. That I think those are some fundamental truths that undersit how you inspire that change. Paul, I wondered if I may come back to yourself. Given your huge amount of experience in the area of market research, maybe it's a bit unfair of me to ask you, but maybe could you briefly showcase an example of how you've, through the insight that you've created, you've really inspired business transformation? What would be an example you may be most proud of?
Of course, we don't always know how our research is used, but I do know how the research has been used for Molson Coors. Molson Coors are a brewer, a very famous brewer, and you'll have drunk their products before, but they also distribute both alcohol drinks and soft drinks to pubs and clubs around the world. You know, so if you have a restaurant and you want to stock up with drinks, Molson Coors will deliver to you. And about 5 years ago or more, probably a little bit more than that, they commissioned us to determine with what the customer experience was like with their deliveries, and we found out it was okay. They got a net promoter score. You're probably all familiar with that. You know, how many people say they're likely to recommend Molson Coors on a scale from 0 to 10, and they got a net promoter score of what's average, about 24, 25. And they realized from the research what things were wrong. They sometimes didn't have the right product portfolio for these pubs and clubs, and sometimes they didn't have the right delivery times and so on. But the most important thing that they didn't have was they didn't inspire their customers. They didn't make their customers feel as if they were truly, truly valued. And what Molson Coors did do is that they made the customer the hero. And what I like about this, by the way, they now have a net promoter score of 55, which is very good indeed, having come up from 24, 25. And one small example of how they did that, first of all, it was taken on board right at the top. The leadership team said, we're going to make customer experience an absolute priority. But whenever they have a meeting within Molson Coors, they bring in a cardboard cutout, and the cardboard cutout is Pat. And they say, Pat, what do you think? And it sounds trite when I tell you this, but they're reminding themselves that in their meetings, they mustn't forget the customer. And I've just recently been reading the autobiography of Amazon and how they've set up. And I noticed that when they have meetings, they leave an empty chair, the empty chair being the chair for the customer, just as Molson Coors has a cardboard cutout. So sort of very small examples, if you like, of how they forget the data eventually and say, what can we do to transform this? The cardboard cutout in Molson Coors' case, and Amazon's case as well, you know, was something that worked.
Oh, I'm loving the idea of having the customer experience brought to life in the workplace. Jill, just building on Paul's story there, he's talked around the customer. You evidently are the voice of the shopper. You know, what specialist kind of behavior research should we be thinking of, or what kind of What around shopper research is so important, do you believe, that kind of that would inspire transformation?
What's really, really important is when we speak to shoppers, they find it very, very difficult to explain their behaviour because it's subconscious. And I think it is always a wonderful light bulb, big brother moment that when we replay back to a room full of shoppers, you told us you did this, but actually look at your behaviour. You turned left when you thought you turned right. You looked down when you thought you look at this. I think it's actually revealing the truth of your behaviour. Just makes people think very differently. And that's, of course, how we turn that into a commercial model is when we explain to people, as already been mentioned before, we say, yes, I know that, teach me something different. And that's the power with insight is always try and tackle a problem. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it absolutely does, because I've seen that light bulb moment go on, and I've done a shop-alongs where I've actually watched shoppers do the opposite to what they've just told me they're going to do. And I'm sure, David, you blending kind of market research and shopper together, have probably seen lots of examples in that. So just lastly, in the final minute or so, I just wondered if you could just tell us what are some of the secrets of Fraction's alchemy.
So I think, Chester, I'm not sure it's alchemy, but it's definitely a blend of the art and the science. I think there is a risk in a world where we're often feeling totally overloaded with information that we can either go into really analysing everything and not moving until we have absolute certainty that a specific course of action is right, or we can actually detach and go, it's too much, it's too difficult, frankly, not, I'm not going to play, and maybe I'm going to fly more based on intuition than on database choices. And I think doesn't really matter where the organization is, or indeed the individuals within the organization. But one of the fundamentals has to be curiosity, really getting beyond the numbers into, well, why do people do that today? And there are lots of new things we can do. There are new data sources available. There are new ways that data sources can be combined. But it's not sufficient to say, crunch this data and produce some nuggets. We need to be curious. We need to be asking really great questions of this ever-increasing number of data elements that we have. And the other thing is, sometimes data doesn't cut it. I spent a long time working when I was in my P&G days with a big UK retailer who we could frankly throw as much insight as we wanted to. It wasn't mobilizing a change of behavior. When we took that insight and turned it into a mock-up TV ad for some work that we could do together, all of a sudden it unlocked things, because sometimes people aren't set up just to receive insight and almost feel pushed into something. Sometimes we need to take it to the next step and create a pull and say, hey, look, if this is true, we should be doing this. What do you reckon? And sometimes that can get people over that impasse of either too much data or too little data.
Oh, thanks, David. I love the pull factor and how you bring that to life. Well, look, who'd have thought 25 minutes could skip through so quickly? So I really appreciate Paul, Jill, and David, your time. I'm sure we could talk for hours more in terms of the subject of inspiring and using that insight. If people would like to know more, their contact details are available through their websites, or you can contact myself at aspire.co.uk. Our phone number is here. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to everybody dialing in. In terms of our next webinar, we're going to take a break until after Christmas, and I think the 19th of January we'll come back, and there will be something around the subject of digital engagement, inspiring and energizing people in the digital space. And we've got Carl Demester joining us from carldemester.com, ex-Coca-Cola, as to how he has brought shopper and consumer engagement through that digital space. My thanks to all for listening and dialing in. Thank you to the panelists. From me, it's goodbye.